Welcome, folks. We're going to jump right in. My name is Rachel Stevens. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the chair of the Vermont chapter of the Sierra Club. It's a volunteer position in my day job. I work at the Environmental Justice Clinic at the Vermont Law School. We are really excited to be welcoming Celia Ryker today to talk about her book, which I highly recommend that you purchase. Here it is, and it's also on the screen. And yeah, we're really excited to welcome her. One of the mission of Sierra Club is to explore, enjoy, and protect. And part of that is a robust, outings program where we encourage people to connect with nature. So we're very excited to talk about that today. Just in terms of quick housekeeping, this is being recorded. You can put questions in the chat. And we ask that you just stay muted until about the half hour. We will pivot from Celia to questions and encourage you to also share your trail stories in the chat and when we get to the Q&A. So welcome, Celia, and I will hand it over to you. Thanks, everyone, for being here.
Thank you. Yes, I decided at 59 years old to just go hiking on Long Trail. And then I decided to write a book, and here we are. Who knew this was going to happen? And what I plan to do tonight is, at the beginning, read a little bit, talk to you, and then do another little reading. And then I guess there's going to be questions and answers and an interview sort of program. So I was going to begin by reading my introduction, because I think it explains a lot. And it's very brief. Introduction. It was my 59th birthday, and as my waking brain realized what day it was, my mind jumped to a childish declaration made over a cake illuminated by 10 candles. I am halfway to 20. Aunt June turned from ice cream scooping and said, "Don't even say something like that." I guess she didn't want to think about children growing up, because that would mean that she would age as well. But to me, being halfway to 20 was cool. Why do I remember that moment so vividly? And yesterday, I spent hours looking for my shoes. I know that getting old is what happens if you don't die young, but the idea of running out of time was both inspiring and sobering. On my 59th birthday, I made a list of things I'd hoped to accomplish and had either failed or not attempted at all. I was alarmed by the length of that inventory. To keep from being depressed, I made a second catalog of achievements I had realized and was pleased with those numbers. But I'm not done yet. I took the first list and prioritized it. 2 projects vied for the top spot. My love of nature and the Long Trail had been calling me since my first visit to Vermont. And then there was my love for writing. I'd written short stories, journal entries, and poetry since I'd learned to hold a pencil. And I had 2 unfinished books in literary limbo. Weighing these challenges, I decided that I could write when I was no longer able to walk. But distance hiking could not wait. I was halfway to 118 years old when I made the decision to hike the Long Trail. And that's how it started. I was approaching the big 6. Oh, my goodness, I'm old. And I didn't see it coming. But turning 30 didn't bother me. I knew friends who were bothered by 40 and 50. 60 seemed like, oh, this is really old. And there were some things I wanted to do, and I was afraid I might run out of time. So I decided to hike the Long Trail. I'd been thinking about it for so long, and I think it was time to start doing something about it. When I told my father about it, I have to reach for something. I told my father about it. I expected fatherly advice. This is the man who taught me how to change a flat tire, not by showing me, but by watching me do it. It's also the man who taught me when I'm traveling to carry extra cash, but keep small amounts in different pockets so that I wouldn't pull out a lot of money in front of anybody. So I expected some fatherly advice. And what I got, he leaned across the table and he said, "You will remember this trip for the rest of your life." He was so excited. Every time I went to see him, he wanted to see any new equipment or maps or whatever. And he was very excited for me. My parents and my grandmother I dedicated the book to them because their encouraging words have really filled my life. And my dad was very excited about this. And I knew I needed to train. I'm old enough. I need to get ready for this. I can't just put on a pack and take off. Sandy, who hiked with me, one time she was talking to one of the young hikers on the trail, and she asked them how they trained, and they looked at her like she was from Mars. And we train? We don't train. We just go for a hike. We trained by walking on the roads, by training in parks. With and without my pack, I had to start slowly. And one of the things I discovered, training in Michigan, I trained here in Vermont and Michigan. We lived between Vermont and Michigan. And I got with some Sierra Club members in Michigan and discovered trails in Michigan that I didn't know existed. I'd never heard of the North Country Trail, the Pacific Crest Trail, the Appalachian Trail, the Long Trail. The North Country Trail begins in North Dakota, goes through Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan's Upper Peninsula, Lower Peninsula, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and into New York. It's over 3,000 miles long, and 748 miles of it are in Michigan, and I'd never heard of it. So I went out and did weekend hikes with some Sierra Club members who taught me how to set up my tent correctly, which was very helpful. And then I got ready for the long trail. When I finally felt like we were ready, Sandy and I had been training. She was in Tennessee, I was in Michigan. And then when we finally got on the trail, we were taken to get onto the trail at the southern border of Vermont. We had to be taken into Massachusetts, hike up to the Appalachian Trail, and then hike back to the long trail. And the people who gave us the ride said, "It's been raining every day for 2 weeks." And I thought, great, perfect. Got that out of its system. We're going to have great weather. And our picture at the trailhead was in perfect sunshine. And it stayed that way for about 2 hours. And then it rained. And we hiked for 7 days. We did not have a 24-hour period without rain. It rained every day, sometime. It didn't rain all day, but it rained. And the trail was already very wet. We were trying to be careful and go around this edge of the trail or that edge of the trail to not get out of the worst of it. And invariably, we were deeper than we would have been if we just walked straight down the trail, which is what most of the hikers did and what we ended up doing. I day hiked almost most of my life. As a child, we went out and hiked everywhere. My husband and I day hike, and we day hiked on and off the long trail many times here in Vermont. And through hiking is to start at the Massachusetts border and hike to Canada and only come off the trail to resupply. And what I ended up doing, Sandy and I, were what they call section hikes. We'd hike for 5 days or 7 days, whatever time period she had available. And we thought we'd get this trail done in 2 or 3 years. Blue Jay, who was at the first campsite we were at, was finishing the long trail southbound. And he'd been working on it for 7 years. And we thought, oh, we'll be done in 2 or 3 years. 8 years later, we finally finished. Life does get in the way. Things happen, and it took longer than I expected. And then it took longer than I expected to write the book. And then it took longer than I expected to get it published. And now I'm just so excited about what's happening now. I'm getting calls from people like you, and Rootstock's been helping me get the word out. And I've been calling people, and it's very exciting. It's very exciting. One of the things I discovered was trail names. I had never heard of trail names, and they're so strange, some of them. Blue Jay, I mentioned. Limping Louie. Sandy's trail name was Sweet Tea, which she said could stand for tea, which she liked, especially sweet, and Tennessee, where she lived at that time. And I ended up with the name Scooter because I ended up scooting along on my bottom half the time, not being able to reach down to that step, and I'd have to scoot along and stretch, and it was, I was dirty and wet a lot, but then most hikers are. And we learned lingo like Nobo means northbound, Sobo is southbound. It was very interesting to find out how the people cared about one another on the trail. One of the first nights on the trail, they were talking about a hiker who was going very slowly, and they hadn't seen her for a while. They wanted to make sure she was all right. And it made me feel better to think that they were watching out for one another. And I was very impressed with that. And it happened all along the trail. And so we're going along, and Sandy and I, she could go to sleep so quickly, and I was always awake and thinking and about this when that happened and when this happened. And I'm going to read a little piece now about that very thing. Now here it is, the following summer, and I'm camping next to a fallen privy, wide awake and listening to the snoring coming from Sandy's tent. She'd fallen asleep quickly, and I should have done the same, but that didn't happen. I imagined Mickey Mouse counting cartoon sheep, jumping over cartoon bed, but that didn't help. A barred owl called in the distance, and I laughed to myself, thinking, maybe I should be counting owls. Number 1 was my very first owl sighting. I never got to number 2 because number 1 brought its own story to mind. My 12-year-old legs didn't have to go far to find wooded areas to search for wildlife. Clarkston was less developed in the early 1960s. Where a sprawling medical center now stands, there'd been an open field, the result of an abandoned building site. This flat area was used by the traveling circus when it came to town. And we hurried out after it left to see if we could find elephant poop or tiger fur where their cages had been. I walked this area often, going to and from the store. Evening was approaching as I strolled home with a small bag of groceries Mom was waiting for. Midway across the open lot edged by woodland, I stopped in my tracks. An enormous silhouette loomed in a tree a few yards away. It looked like someone had chopped off Batman's head and plopped it on a branch. I don't know how long I stood there, waiting for that bird to move. The owl sat huge and foreboding in the twilight, and I waited, hoping to see it fly, while wishing it would stay there as long as I stood still. Finally, I had to move. It was nearly dark, and being home before dark was a must. I was walking sideways and nearly fell over when Batman's head lifted itself into the air and flew into the forest. Sandy's snoring grew faint, and my owl memories faded to black. And that's part of what the book is about, me remembering the time this happened. And when you slow down to the speed of your legs for days on end, you think differently. Everything slows down. There's no television, no radio, and you're talking to hikers, who mainly are talking about food and the weather. Food and the weather were the top priorities in conversation in camp at night. So we're traveling every day. Sandy and I are moving along and so much slower than everybody else. She's 8 inches taller than I am and 20 years younger. So she waited for me a lot. She was very patient. Fortunately, she wasn't much faster than I was at the beginning. And so she would go on ahead and stop. We saw very little wildlife. I'm sure they saw us. We saw the tracks of deer and moose and bobcat and bear, but we didn't see anything until Sandy was up ahead of me when she said she looked to the left just as a bull moose looked to the right, and he was right there. She got behind a tree and was going to try to take a picture, but he turned around and ran back in the direction that I was coming from. So she shouted to me that there was a moose coming, and I hid behind a tree and watched it go right by it. That's as close as I want to get to that kind of wildlife, but it was very exciting. It was fun. And it was, most of the wildlife we saw was salamanders and frogs and such. We didn't see much. That was the biggest bit of wildlife we witnessed along the trail. And I wanted to read another little piece here. This was this one's called Ghosts. Sandy and I were the only people at Lulatai. Within my dark tent, the quiet of the forest was disturbed by an animal moving outside, inches from my ear. I couldn't see what was rustling through the leaves so close to my fabric home. But Sandy had a rainfly flipped back, and she could see what I could not. Sandy, do you see something out near my tent? She shone her headlamp in my direction. It's a rabbit. It sounds like a rhinoceros. The moon was bright, and the shadows of individual leaves were crisp against my tent flap. A slight breeze created the visual effect of a foliar kabuki dance. I was lying there mesmerized by the show when a loon's call floated from Little Rock Pond. Oh, cool. Now I had this fabulous visual. Beyond Sandy, this fabulous sound to go with the visual. Beyond Sandy's tent, 2 barred owls called to one another. A screech owl, some distance off, enhanced the audio, creating a triangle of woodland sounds. I envisioned the forest full of night birds. I was waiting for sleep when I heard a sound that sat me straight up. No, it wasn't a bear or a rhinoceros, but an owl that I'd never heard before. It made a single deep, resonant hoot. Could it be a great gray owl? They're rare and don't call as often as some owls, but I think they hoot in little groups, not a single call. I sat in the darkness, straining to hear it again. I was about to give up when I heard it, a single call, deep and close. That was a big owl. It wasn't a great horned owl. I'd heard them before. It may not have been a great gray, but I'm going to remember it as such until someone informs me to the contrary. I didn't hear it again, so I lay back in my sleeping bag, thinking that the night couldn't have been any better. But I was wrong. 2 barred owls moved in and began chatting. One in the beech tree near Sandy's tent, and one in the maple next to mine. Nestled against the forest floor, I drifted towards sleep, listening to a barred owl serenade. My sleepy thoughts turned to my dad's prediction. You will remember this for the rest of your life. And I will. He predicted correctly. There were so many sights along the trail. So many things happened. My first time on a summit above tree line looking off the mountain. I thought it was going to be fabulous. And I stood up and turned around and fell down because I felt like I was falling off the mountain. I didn't feel like I was going to fall. I felt like I was in the process of falling off. It was the strangest thing. And it took a few minutes and then I was okay. But the mountain summits were amazing. It was just so exciting to get up there, so difficult to get up there, which made it even more rewarding. But the visual from that height, looking into the distance, and especially if I saw a little house down there, I'd wonder if someone was in that house looking up here and wondering if someone was up here looking down there. But I also wondered about all the wildlife that was in and among all those trees. And then about everything right down to the tiny animals and the microorganisms in the soil. I mean, it made the web of life so clear from up there that I just thought it was amazing. And then that's when I decided I need to get Don, my husband Don, to the top of some mountains so he can see this. So they did get me to bring other people up on the mountains as well. And that just, it brought it all home. And when we finished the hike, and I had somebody ask us, they were listening to us talk about how difficult it had been and said, so why did you do that? Well, it was so exciting. Was there anything about it that was good? Everything about it was good. Even the hard parts were good. It was difficult in the rock climb to the summit was difficult, but sitting there was fabulous. Knowing that you were going to have to rock climb back down. We're not going to think about that right now because this is so great. But sometimes the down was more difficult than the up because you can see where you're going to reach up and step to, but going backwards downhill was a lot more difficult. And many times off the summits, that's what you were doing. You were coming back, coming down backwards. But one of the things my husband asked that we hadn't thought about, well, he said, how many mountains did you summit? So we took out the map and we started counting, and we summited 52 mountains, most of them in the clouds, many of them in the rain. But 52 mountains, we hadn't really thought about it that way. And I thought we were pretty impressed with ourselves when we saw that. So that made us think about it a little differently. And I did buy some shirts for us that said, hiked it, liked it, Vermont, because it was so enjoyable. It was difficult and inspiring. And when I saw people coming onto the trail fresh, wearing blue jeans and cotton t-shirts, I thought, you're going to get wet and that stuff's never going to dry off. You need to get some lightweight clothing that dries quickly. But they were starting and they were excited and they were young, and I'm sure I hope they finished. I just heard from someone who finished the hike, I think today. She spoke to me just before she left. I made some recommendations on some gear, and after 4 days, she called home and came off to get some better gear. But she did go back and finish. But after 4 days, she called her parents, and she's young. And I think she thought she could just get on the trail and hike. And it was more difficult than she thought. It made me feel a little better. But knowing that she went back on, came off and she was hiking in sandals. And I told her, I haven't seen anybody hike in sandals, but she did come off after 4 days, get some boots. And just today I found out she'd finished, and she wanted to come and talk to me about it. So that was exciting and fun. And that's one of the things I've been doing too, is talking about this because it was so exciting to me. So entertaining and challenging, and the combination just makes me want to go back. I haven't done much hiking this year, partly because of the book. Doing these talks, and last summer I hiked with, I decided to go out alone, and I hiked a bit here in Vermont and in New Hampshire, met someone who was also hiking alone, and she and I did several hikes together, short hikes, little section hikes. She now is coming up from Georgia and finishing the Appalachian Trail, so I'm excited for her too. So that I think will bring me to the point where I think people are going to ask questions. And I talked today at the Manchester Library, and was really pleased to have such a diverse audience. They were young, they were old, they were couples, they were some with children, and it was really fun. They were very excited, or very interested, and I was excited to talk to them about it. So hopefully other people want to ask questions, and I have.
Wow, great. Thank you, Celia. That's so inspiring and exciting. Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Crowley. I'm along with Rachel. I'm on the executive committee of the Sierra Club, and I'll be here cruising for questions. And I welcome everybody to post your questions in the chat, or otherwise raise your hand. It might be a little tough to see everybody's hand raised, so that's why we kind of use the chat. But I don't want to go first to Stephen MacArthur, Celia's publisher. Stephen, you have a question there.
Okay, I'm reading it now.
Okay.
Never asked you before, or if he wants to read it.
Well,
Go ahead,
Celia, if you want to read it.
Okay.
It's basically a question I don't ever remember asking you.
Okay. He said, okay, his question is, I never asked you this, but before you began to hike, did you consider the idea of writing about it? If not, when did you decide you needed to write this book? Well, I hadn't thought about writing this book, but I did keep a journal as I hiked, and it was during the hike that I started thinking. Initially, I thought what I was going to write would be an informational book for pamphlet for older hikers deciding to do this. It was going to be just some information about what we old folks should do, how we should get ready, and what kind of equipment we might need. And as I wrote the book, the pamphlet, it put on its own boots, and it just took off, and it became the book that you've helped me get out here. So it just took off on me, and I really enjoyed the writing process too.
So glad you did. Let's see, Sharon or Ken has a question. What did you carry for food?
Oh, one of the things I had photos of Sandy having lunch, and it was, we were always looking at our map. So the map's on the table, and her knife is there to cut up the elk sausage that she had, and the pita bread, and she had tuna fish in a little container and a little foil wrap. My lunch was usually a Cliff Bar. I carry everything heavy in the bottom of my pack, and at lunchtime I didn't want to dig it out. So during the day I ate raisin and peanuts, gorp. I always thought it was trail mix. On the trail, they don't call it trail mix. They call it gorp, good old raisins and peanuts. And we did nibble on that all day. But in the evenings, I had freeze-dried meals that you can buy at any of the places that sell backpacking equipment. And I was stunned the first time I had chicken teriyaki on the trail, and it looked and smelled and tasted like chicken teriyaki. And I used a jet boil for my kitchen, for my stove, and it boils water very quickly, which makes creating these freeze-dried dinners very, very easy and quick. Sandy, on the other hand, carried real rice. And I discovered that I have to turn down the heat on the jet boil a lot to keep from burning the rice. And I learned that by burning the rice and tasting burned rice for days afterwards. But mainly, most people use freeze-dried food. There were some people who dried their own food, which I didn't do that. I didn't do, but I was surprised how little food I wanted to eat at the end of the day. I had trouble eating a meal for one. I had to break them into two because I was thirsty, but I wasn't hungry. After walking all day long, I wasn't hungry, but I was thirsty. So I took a meal for one person and broke them into two pieces, broke them into two that I put in separate containers because I just couldn't eat that much. And I talked to other hikers who did the same thing, that they just weren't that hungry.
Wow. Rachel, you have a question here.
Yeah, I'm curious about if you did any first aid training or wilderness training, or if you could share a story. I mean, hopefully you didn't have any trail injuries, but I'm just curious. I feel like maybe that's something that folks who might be intimidated are curious about.
Well, I did take a weekend seminar with the Green Mountain Club in wilderness first aid, and it did change what I carried in my first aid kit. But they did a whole weekend. One of the things they taught us was if someone injures themselves on the trail and you need to help them, use the contents of their pack, because they're probably not going on and you can. So they had it was very informational. I'm so glad I didn't have to use any of the things I learned there, but how to set a limb with using your tent poles and your sleeping mat. They have those self-inflatable sleeping mats, and you take your tent poles and wrap them around the leg or the arm, and then tie the sleeping mat around it and open it up until it fills to the point where it's giving you the amount of pressure you need, and then turn it off. And you've got a very effective splint, almost a cast. And I was very impressed with that. But it was very interesting, and I'm so glad I didn't need to use any of it.
Mhm. All right, we have a question from Joyce or Julia, or Joyce Julia, I'm not sure. Do you want to?
Okay, how much did your pack weigh? It changed. When I started my pack with enough food for 7 days and water, it weighed 48 pounds. So I was carrying almost 50 pounds. By the end of the hike, I had gotten rid of so many things. Get rid of this, you're not using it. Get rid of that. And Sandy and I started sharing things where she had a stove and I had a stove. She had a first aid kit. I'll carry the water purifier and the first aid kit. You carry the stove. And we just kept lightening our packs. And we weighed everything, absolutely everything. By the end, my pack, fully packed for 7 days with water, was, I think it came down to like 37 or 36 pounds. So that's a big difference. But you don't realize how peanut butter, discussing peanut butter. She loved peanut butter, but it's heavy. I'm not bringing peanut butter again. It's too heavy. It's also hard to eat out of a Ziploc baggie. So, and Ziploc baggies we used a lot. That was our trash can and our food containment. And
I'm reminded of the scene in the Wild movie where Cheryl Strayed is emptying her pack and the guy is ripping out pieces of her book for her to lighten up.
Yeah. Just the only book I carried was, I had a small book about the the wildlife, it was put out by the Green Mountain Club, the wildlife and terrain and that I was going to hear, to see along the trail. I did carry that with me, and I carried a book of poetry because you can carry a tiny little book of poetry, then you can read that over and over again. So I did carry a book, but most people don't. The really strict, keep it light hikers, some of them didn't even carry sleeping pads. I mean, they were carrying 15 and 20 pound packs. So.
A quick question from Rachel's, which book?
Which book? I carry different book. You're talking about the poetry? I carried different books because I was doing it in sections. I started with, good grief. Oh, there are so many, and I can't think of a name right now. Yeah, pardon, Don's over there talking.
Well, we'll come back to that if you remember. Nancy
Okay.
Helen has a question. Nancy, do you want to ask that?
Is this the one about the tent and staying?
Yes, you had a tent. Did you also sleep in shelters?
I preferred the tent. The first night we spent in a shelter, there are 14 people sleeping on a deck in a 3-sided building. And I put my spot at the side so that I was on the edge. Sandy was next to me, and then the rest of our group was over here. And I didn't realize that I'd put myself right next to the run for the rodents. They came right along the edge of the shelter. The mice and chipmunks were very busy all night long. So that didn't help. And then there was quadraphonic snoring. Everybody's snoring. And then I think there were other sounds that made me think that someone may have had beans for dinner. So I didn't sleep very much. I definitely preferred my tent because Billy Collins is one of the poets I had with me. His are nice and small, and he even had one about hiking, which I thought was interesting. So that's the name I couldn't remember, but so.
Well, I've got a question for you.
Yes.
When you were up there, in any of your sections, was there anything that you really hadn't expected to learn that you learned about hiking?
So much. It was just more difficult than I thought it was going to be. The community among the hikers surprised me because nobody knows. They don't know one another, and they're having these conversations about their lives and there was one gentleman who was a physics professor, and I had to ask him. He had a backpack, but he carried his food in a bag in front of him in his hands. And I asked him if there was some physics reason for that, because it just seemed awkward. And he said, no, I just can't fit it in my bag. So I thought, okay, well, that's not very scientific, but it's probably accurate. And we thought we were going to hike 10 or 15 miles a day because I'd trained and I could get down a 3 and 4 mile an hour hike with a pack. But the long trail's hard, much more difficult than that. And we did, I think our longest days were probably 10 or 11 miles. We were very excited when we could do that. The first few days we were doing 7 or 8 miles. There were some when we only did 5 and we were tired. The first night we were told that hiking in sections is more difficult because it takes 3 or 4 days to get your trail legs. And it was on about day 4 that I knew what that meant. All of a sudden, it didn't feel so hard. I felt like I could walk up a cliff. And it, I had never, trail legs. This is what it's like. Sandy was feeling it too. And we were, oh, wow, we could walk forever. And that was one of the first days we put down a 10-mile day. So yeah, getting your trail legs, that was, I'd never felt like, I felt like I could just walk forever.
Did you have to do that anew each section?
Yes. Yeah, it started, that's one of the things they told us, if you're hiking in sections, you have to start all over again. So it takes you 2 or 3 days or 3 or 4 days to get your trail legs again. So that, I think there's a part of me that wishes I could just get on the trail, do it again and just stay on it and see what it would feel like. To just stay on the trail and come off only to get food and clean up. Because you do need to clean up. When now I don't, when I see hikers walking into town, I always stop and pick them up. I was with a friend the other day, or last year, I think, and I saw this hiker heading for Woodstock. And I told my friend, I said, I'm going to pick him up. He's going to smell horrible. And he smelled much worse than that. And it wasn't a very warm day, and we had all the windows open. And he said, I know it's terrible. He was from Germany, and he was trying to get into Woodstock to watch a soccer game. So to watch his team in a soccer game. So we got him into town and to the store. I was talking to someone at a writer's workshop for nature, for people who write about nature with the woodlands, northern woodlands. They put on a seminar every October. And I was talking to someone there who had hiked 1,000 miles of the Appalachian Trail from Georgia up 1,000 miles. And then the person she was hiking with couldn't make it, couldn't go any further. And she ended up coming back here to Vermont and thought she would go and hike some more on the long trail. And they had been able to do 10 and 12 miles. She had been doing 10 or 12 miles on the Appalachian Trail, and on the long trail, she said I could barely get 8 miles in. So it is a little more difficult than some of the trails.
So I've heard. So we've got a couple of questions here, but please, if anybody has trail stories, as Rachel has posted in the chat, if anybody wants to share that would be great. Just raise your hand, and we can pull you in. Joyce has a question about your favorite section.
Favorite section. Oh, good grief. I think when we, again, it was one of the most challenging sections, but it was getting over Mansfield, coming up on the ledge when it was so slippery, getting to the summit of Mansfield, that was good. But I think favorite as far as just seeing beautiful things. I think coming up over Camel's Hump, it wasn't as challenging as Mansfield, but it was just a beautiful hike. And getting to the summit of Camel's Hump and being on the very top and having a 360 view was just very, very impressive. And it happened to be on a weekend when there were lots of other hikers up there, day hikers. And everybody was eating lunch. It was like having a picnic with strangers. And we were having a really good time. So. Well,
I bet that a lot of people on this call were at that moment visioning their own favorite parts. So please raise your hand. Nancy again. Nancy, do you want to ask this?
In the write-up, it was talking about how you thought about how people inspired you as you were hiking. And I was wondering if you could share some about that.
Well, some of it was, my parents were always very encouraging, but my grandmother was one of the first people I remember introducing me to nature. She would catch snakes and let me touch, because I was afraid of a snake, she'd catch them and hold them for me so I could see they were soft and they weren't scary. And she took me out on a boat when I was afraid of the sound the loons made, and so that I could see that they were kind of pretty and funny. And so yeah, when I saw snakes on top of Mount Baker, I thought of her. When I heard the loon on Little Rock Pond, I thought of her. So she was one of the people that I thought of often when I was hiking. I thought sometimes of my parents. My mother, when we went to the Detroit Zoo, the part of the zoo I wanted most to see was a little piece off to the side, right near the front gate, that's a tiny little woods. It's nothing by most people's standards. But when I was little, that was a forest. It was, I don't know, one of my friends said he had 5 trees and a couple of shrubs. But to me as a child, that was walking in a forest. And that was when I first started to look at a path or a trail and think, I wonder where it goes. And my mother used to take me on that little path and let my brothers go with my dad. And we'd stay in there and look. It was the first time I saw a walking stick bug. It looks like a praying mantis made out of sticks. And I was so amazed that this stick could just walk along. And it seems strange to say that my introduction to the forest was at a zoo in Detroit, but it was very important to me when I was very small. And part of the writing process was when I first put this together. I had kept a journal all along the trail and put a note about grandma there, but I didn't write it. And so I wrote it all out, and then I had it, when I had what I thought was a book, I had childhood hikes, an introduction to Vermont, and getting ready to hike. And I was here before I got on the trail, and that's way too much backstory. So then I had to figure out where I was going to start it and how I was going to put all these stories back in. And once I had it down to a size I thought would work, that's when I took it to Rootstock, and they helped me hone it down and make it more precise and create the product that we have here today. So, but it took a long time. I wrote it in chronological order first, and then had to figure out how to change it back. And I worked with a writers group, which I thought is very helpful. I'm a member of the League of Vermont Writers, and at one of their meetings, 2 of the different speakers said that if you're not working with a writers group, you're working at a disadvantage. And I could feel a little smug because I was working with the writers group at that time. Accidentally found a very good writers group that I've been working with. But it's very, very helpful to have someone else reading your material and talking to you about it, and then read theirs and talk about what's working for them and not working. So, and we have every sort of, there was memoir and novel and science fiction, and so it makes it interesting too.
I'll ask another one, Steve.
Go ahead, Rachel. Sure.
While we're waiting for folks, I'm curious, what would be, this is kind of like if you could only bring like 3 things on your trail. I know obviously you had a whole pack, but like, do you have kind of your top 3 like most essential items, or however you want to interpret that? Like, what were the things that you really couldn't live without?
Okay, water purifier. I have a pump water purifier that a lot of hikers don't use because it's heavy and bulky. But they would dip their water bottles into the stream or the lake or whatever we had to as a water source. And then either chemically, then they would chemically treat the water to purify it, or there was a little battery operated, it looks like a tiny lightsaber, and it glowed red when you first did it, and you'd stir it in your water, and when the water was purified, that would turn green. But the problem was that when you dip that water out of the lake or the stream, you're dipping up some of the sediment and things that are in the water. And they call it, on the trail, they call it trail spice. I call it dirt. And having sterilized dirt is better than not, but I used a pump, and it produced water that didn't get caught in my teeth. But a lot of hikers didn't use that. They didn't want, again, weighing everything. That was too heavy. I did, and I've met a lot of people using iPhones on the trail, using phones on the trail. They had, some of them had, it was a solar little, it flipped out, and they could set it on a picnic table or on a rock or whatever, and recharge their phone with that. Most of us didn't use it much. We would text to get somebody to come and pick us up when things weren't going well or whatever, but we didn't use them much. The younger people, of course, they all had their little, I saw somebody and he had the solar panel on the top of his pack so that it could charge as he was walking. But most of the time we're walking in the woods. Much of the time they call the trail the Green Tunnel, because you're not in the sun very much. I didn't need sunscreen much because we were in the woods, except when you're on an exposed mountain, you're in the woods almost all the time. I did see a person, the person I hiked with last summer in New Hampshire. She kept everything charged, and she taught biology and environmental science, and she was actually teaching classes from the trail. She was doing her virtual classes quite often from the shelter area down by the brook. I don't know how she managed to do that, but she was doing it pretty much the whole time we were hiking together.
Checking to see if we have other questions. Feel free. Let's see. Another question from Sharon and Ken. Ticks on the trail?
Never saw one. Never saw a tick on the trail. I get here on our property here. I've seen ticks. I'm actually recovering from anaplasmosis, which is a tick-borne illness. But I didn't see any on the trail. But they're everywhere. If you're off the trail, I think partly because the trail is so heavily traveled, and you don't have a lot of branches hanging in the way. And so staying on the wider trails might help, but I don't know why I didn't see any, but I didn't see a tick. So I found that interesting. I saw some when I was in Upper Michigan, when I was hiking to get ready to come on the long trail, but I didn't see one tick on the trail. But they're like crazy around here.
I wonder,
Sure.
Steve, I know it looks like Ken, you just finished the long trail. Do you mind sharing? Do you have a trail name? Can you share your trail name?
We'll unmute.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, my name was Scarecrow. Yeah. And I just gave it to myself because I section hiked the trail. And a lot of times it took me years, by the way, too. And a lot of times people will give you a trail name, but I kind of figured, judging on my appearance, the skinny body and reddish hair.
The trail name I picked for myself was Ovenbird because I love ovenbirds. They're so cute and they're woodland birds.
Yeah.
And their nest is shaped like a Dutch oven. But when I told people about that, they said they thought it sounded like a turkey or a chicken that you would roast. I thought, no, that's not what it's supposed to be. But I ended up being given the name Scooter because I was scooting along and Sandy said, we should call you Scoots a lot. And then it turned into Scooter. So.
Well.
But yeah, I heard a lot of them, Jelly Bean and Quick Toes and.
Yeah. I heard, one guy, he was, let me think now, he was down near the southern part of the state heading north. And he called himself Posh Jesus because he hiked in sandals. And he was also a very, very healthy young man. And he was planning to hike 26 miles from the shelter where we were camped that night. He was going to hike 26 miles the next day. And I just is stunning, some of the mileage that people do, but that's,
Yeah, we had people come into camp in the dark come into camp by headlamp and leave by headlamp in the morning. And you wonder how much of the trail they don't see by putting down that many miles and hiking in the dark.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
Because
people.
we kind of dawdled and we took pictures and we stopped to look at that and we weren't trying to break speed records obviously, but we did stop like tourists a lot.
Yeah, me too. I did on average 7 or 8 miles a day, and I carried regular food, old equipment that I had. I didn't update my equipment a lot, and I love to, look at the trees, the plants. I like to identify trees and
Exactly.
animal tracks, like you said. Those tracks you saw, and it's great. It's a wonderful place.
Yeah, I hiked with somebody in Michigan who was always trying to identify the scat.
Uh-huh.
She didn't have a trail name, so I gave her the trail name Poopsie.
Yeah.
And she was, what do you think did that? And where do you think that came? So yeah, she didn't miss, and she saw every little thing, like tiny little baby turtles. She found everything. So
Yeah.
so how many days did you go out for?
My last section that I did this summer, I went out for 10 days, but I got off the trail twice to spend the night somewhere else and resupply.
Okay, because I was going to say 10 days and no freeze-dried food?
No. Well, dehydrated, like macaroni, whole wheat
Okay.
macaroni. I did carry peanut butter, granola, bagels, and that. So,
God, I didn't see many bagels on the trail.
yeah. Oh, I saw one. A guy from Israel. He was eating a bagel for breakfast one morning. Yeah.
Well, Celia, if you can hang around, I do want to, since we're at the hour, I do want to just make one more plug for your book. walking home. Encourage everyone to pick up a copy. I'm assuming, Celia, these are available anywhere books are sold, or?
Yeah, they're available anywhere. You can get them on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and bookstores can order them. So,
Excellent. And do you have any other like events in Vermont or anything you'd want to mention?
in
to the
Vermont,
group?
well, I have I'm going to be speaking at a different libraries over August and September, but I've got on the 30th, I'm doing an interview with WDEV, the local radio station here, and in their morning show. I'm doing that at 9:30, I think, or 10:30 on Friday, the 30th.
Great. Do you have a website that we can put in the
Yes,
chat?
it's CeliaRyker.com, and there's a list of the libraries and bookstores that I'll be speaking at, and it's CeliaRyker.com.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your story. And Celia, if you can hang around for a little bit, other folks might have some questions, but just want to appreciate that we're at the 9 o'clock hour. I also just want to make a plug for our upcoming community conversations. You can find all of our Sierra Club events on sierraclub.org/Vermont. We have a whole page. And if you have an event or speaker or topic that you'd like us to talk about, please let us know. Our contact information is on the website, or you can put an idea in the chat, and we try to do these events almost every Wednesday evening. So I'll let you, Ken and Celia, continue the conversation, but just wanted to thank you officially for joining us.
And anyone else, of course, as well.
Yeah. Great.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.